All right, pre-AP biology. Today we're going to continue with our notes on Unit 4. Um, One of the things I just want to make sure people are aware of, um, I know I had some kids last week who had some trouble accessing some of my notes. So in the Buzz folders, I'm going to start having my notes saved as PDF files. So you guys should be able to access all of those things. I'll even include those PDF files in the links um, on the agenda. So when you click on them, you should be able to see everything. But if you do have any troubles, seeing either the PowerPoints or um, like the fill in notes, even though like you don't have to fill in notes at home, during COVID, but when we're at school, I want you to do that. But if you want to print those out, you should be able to do all that stuff if you need to at home. Okay, so we're going to again continue with our notes on Unit 4. We previously spent a lot of time talking about just kind of the internal workings of the cell, all the different cell parts and organelles and what they do. You guys did a pretty good job on the quiz that we took over that. So now we're going to move on to another topic concerning cells, which is called cellular transport. So if you think about what the word transport means, right? It means to move things from point A to point B. That's what transporting means. How do things transport back and forth, outside the cell to the inside of the cell and vice versa. So that's kind of what we're going to discuss here in these notes. This is kind of a big topic, so you may want to watch this video twice if you don't understand some of the concepts. All right, so let's first talk a little bit about the boundaries of a cell, right? I mean, here's a picture of a couple of different cells here, and pretty much every cell that makes up your body exists in a liquid environment. And what that means is basically there's water, not only on the inside of the cells, but there's also water on the outside. So, for example, this little cell here, whatever kind of cell that is, there's a whole bunch of water on the inside of it, right? Cytoplasm, it's basically water. But there's also a lot of water on the outside. I mean, think about your brain, for example, like your brain that's inside your skull. Your brain cells, have liquid inside, has cytoplasm like every cell does. But your brain is actually floating inside of your skull in a liquid. It's called cerebrospinal fluid. So your brain is actually surrounded by water. So your brain cells, there's again water on the inside, there's water on the outside. Your blood cells, like your red blood cells, your white blood cells, they're floating in a liquid called plasma. Plasma is basically water. There's some other things in it too, but I mean, like your red blood cells, which have water in them, those red blood cells are floating in plasma, which is water as well. So you've got a lot of water around cells. Now, this water, for the most part, is not really pure water. It's actually a solution of water. For example, inside of this cell, there's not like 100% pure water. It's like water mixed with other things, like salts, and sugars, dissolved oxygen, and whatever else might be in there. But I want to introduce a couple terms to you here. The first term is called a solution. A solution is a mixture of two things. One's called a solvent, and the other one is called solute. So I want to make sure I can break those two terms down for you. The term solvent, this is the main part of a solution. It's the part that dissolves, or dissolves something else. A great example is water. I mean, for example, in your cells, the solvent is water. You got a ton of water on the inside of your cells, tons of water on the outside. Now, what are some of the things that are dissolved in that water? Those are called the solutes. All right, the solutes, I consider them to be the minor component of the solution. These are the things that get dissolved. So salt, sugars, ions, whatever might be in that water. If you have a glass of salt water, that you got from the ocean or you made it or whatever, whatever, salt water. The water is what's doing the dissolving, right? It's the solvent. The salt, which is what gets dissolved, that would be the solute. So make sure these three terms, solution, solvent, and solute, make sure that you can distinguish between those three things. That's important. All right, now the term concentration. The term concentration is basically a measurement, and it measures the amount of a solute that gets dissolved in a solvent. Most of these concentrations you can easily calculate them. I mean, for example, let's say you have 10 grams of salt that you put into 2 liters of water. So say you have a 2 liter container filled with water and you put 10 grams of salt in it. We can easily figure out the concentration. The concentration is basically the amount of solute divided by the amount of solvent. So it's a simple division problem, okay? Solute over solvent. So we have 5 grams I'm sorry, we have 10 grams of salt divided by 2 liters of water. Well, 10 divided by 2 gives us 5 grams per liter. So the concentration is 5 grams per liter. If you had a different concentration, or a different solution, I should say, so you have 20 grams of salt dissolved in 2 liters of water. Well, again, just do a simple division problem. 20 grams divided by 2 liters gives you 10 grams per liter. So, solution B, just by doing the math, we can kind of tell that solution B is twice as concentrated as solution A is. All right, so just by looking at those numbers, the higher the number, the more concentrated the solution is. All right, so like when we think of concentrated, we typically, yeah, like one thing that comes to mind for me is like when you go to the grocery store and you like buy like one of those little cans of like frozen orange juice, and like on the side of it it'll say, concentrated. So like you don't want to drink that like right out of the can, right? You want to take that concentrated juice and you want to add water to it, right? You want to dilute it. So when you dilute something, you're going to add more water to it. So you're going to add more solvent to it, right? That will dilute it. If you want to make it more concentrated, well, then you would either add less water or you would add more solute to it. That would make it more concentrated. So, just make sure we kind of understand how to do the math for these problems. It's fairly simple. All right. Now, a couple more a lot of vocabulary today. The term diffusion says in a solution, substances move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. This little animation here, for example, right? And we can see, oops, go back a little bit. You can see, why did it stop working? Maybe I have to do it this way. Here we go. And you can kind of see here in this little animation, the particles that are going to be moving, from an area of high concentration, in the bottom left-hand corner, they're highly concentrated, and then they kind of spread out to areas of lower concentration. And that's kind of what the term diffusion is. You probably learned this term, back in, I don't know, sixth, seventh grade or something. The same thing over here. Let's say we have a container. I don't know, say you have some water, and I guess the classic examples, you put some food coloring in it. So say these little red dots here, let's say these represent some little food coloring particles. Well, if you just put a couple drops of food coloring into water, you can do this at home if you want to, if you have some food coloring. That food coloring is very highly concentrated in one little area of the container. But over time, that food coloring is going to spread, right? It's going to move to areas of lower concentration. And eventually it's going to spread and fill up the entire container. So that's what diffusion is. I mean, if you stood in the corner of a room and let's say you took your brother or sister, you put them in the other corner of the room. and you started spraying some air freshener. Initially, your brother or sister who's sitting in the other corner of the room, they may not be able to smell it. But as you keep spraying that air freshener, it's going to be so highly concentrated in the area where you're standing, but those particles are eventually going to diffuse and fill up the entire room. And eventually, your brother or sister who's sitting on the other side of the room is going to smell that, right? So, the term diffusion is just moving again from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. Now, there's lots of things that can move across your cells this way. I mean, for example, remember your cells are what we call semi-permeable. So some things, things like oxygen gas, carbon dioxide gas, water, amino acids, which are really tiny little particles, these things can very easily just move back and forth across your cell membranes. Here's your phospholipid bilayer, right? Your cell membrane. It can move across and move from areas of high concentration to low concentration very easily. Now, there are some particles that are really big, things like proteins and big sugar molecules. Those things can't just pass through these phospholipids very easily. Instead, they would probably need to go through channels like channel proteins. Right? But a lot of things can pass through very easily just through the process of diffusion. Now, there's a term here called osmosis. Osmosis is um, basically a type of diffusion. And it's a type of diffusion that involves only water. So we're not talking about carbon dioxide. We're not talking about oxygen gas. We're not talking about proteins or whatever. We're talking strictly water. So if water, which is on both sides of your cell membrane, if water moves back and forth from, you know, one side of the cell to another, it's going to again move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. And the cell doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to exert any energy. It doesn't have to use any ATP. This just happens all the time. We call this passive transport. Passive transport means that the cell doesn't have to really exert any energy for this to happen. So, I mean, here's a good example. Actually, I'm going to get out of this animation real quick. So, if you kind of look here, this is your cell membrane. Okay, this is your phospholipid bilayer, and on both sides of this membrane, you have two particles. You've got these little water molecules here, right? Little H2Os, which water molecules, like I said before, those things can easily pass back and forth across this membrane. And then you've got these solute particles, these big green thing. I don't know, these could be, I don't know, sugar molecules or whatever. They're just too big to pass back and forth across the membrane. So these solute particles are not able to go back and forth, but the water molecules are. Now, I just told you that osmosis, water moves from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. So look at both sides of this membrane. You'll notice on the left-hand side, there is a lot of water, right? So this is fairly highly concentrated. Whereas on the right-hand side, there is not very many water molecules over here. So this is not very highly concentrated with water. So again, if water moves from areas of high to low concentration, we would expect that the water molecules on the left are going to go over to the right until they kind of balance themselves out. So let's kind of see what happens here. So you'll see those water molecules, and you will notice that they're moving kind of in both directions. But now I want you to take a look at both sides of the membrane. In fact, if you counted up these little water molecules, there's actually 15 of them on both sides. So now what's happened is we've reached equilibrium. All right, that water can move back and forth and it moves from high to low concentration, but again, it moves until we reach that stage of what we call equilibrium. So that's kind of an important thing. Water moves all the time across that membrane, high to low. Here's another picture of this as well. It's not an animation, but um, so let's just say, for example, that this is the cell, and here we have our cell membrane right down the middle here. Okay, so this is a differentially permeable membrane. Same thing as a selectively permeable membrane or a semi-permeable membrane. Things can pass back and forth, but not everything can. All right. So, for example, this membrane again is permeable to water. Water can pass back and forth, but larger molecules like, let's say, sugar or sucrose, those molecules can't. So, where would we expect water to move? Well, if you just look at the picture on the left, this is like pure water. It's like 100% water. Whereas over on the right, this is not pure water, right? It might only be, I don't know, 75% water or something. I mean, it's not as highly concentrated with water. So again, if water moves from high to low concentration, we would expect the water to move to the right. And we would expect that water level on the right to actually go up because that water is moving from areas of high concentration to low concentration. All right, guys, we're going to stop here for today. So we'll continue with this lecture tomorrow. There's a few more things I want to talk to you about osmosis, but we'll stop here for today. Again, check your buzz agendas for any homework assignments for today as well. So have a good day, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.